Okay, so without further ado, I'm going to introduce the fabulous panel we have today. We are talking about grassroots approaches to democratizing entrepreneurship. Now say that fast. It's very difficult, let me tell you. So first of all, we're going to start by introducing the whole team. We have Margaret to begin with. Margaret, would you like to introduce yourself, where you're from, and tell us about why this subject matter is important to you in the role you do?
Okay, sure.
Oh. I think this one should be working.
Hello.
Now.
No, it's all right. I've got
They're
this
all
one.
working. Yeah.
Okay, thanks. So my name is Margaret Ledwith. I'm currently the director of RMIT Activator. And at Activator, I guess our job is to help the university deliver impact into the communities it serves through the platform of entrepreneurship. And we take a really broad view on that. That can be from starting a micro e-commerce style business right through to VC-led businesses. It's really important to me to make sure that entrepreneurship is accessible. I see entrepreneurship as a platform for hope, for self-determination, for prosperity. And a lot of the narrative that we see can be quite exclusive and can be about our high-growth startups and our unicorns, and perhaps not accessible to those who most need it, for those for whom the system doesn't necessarily work, those who have barriers to entry into employment, regional and rural communities, our Indigenous communities, etc. And I say that as somebody who tried to build businesses in rural Ireland and lost them in the GFC, and that's my personal motivation for having gotten into entrepreneurship, because I worked with people for whom it was the only way that they had to reinvent themselves after losing everything. And it got really personal. And so it's a very personal journey. And I'm very privileged to sit here today and to try and help others build the skills to do the same thing. So that's my story.
Amazing, amazing. And I love how connected you are to this theme, especially from a rural perspective. And I know we'll talk about that in a little while. Akhil, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hey everyone, Akhil here. I'm the investments director at Antler, based out of Melbourne, but we operate across Melbourne and Sydney. For those of you who don't know Antler, we're an early stage VC. When we say early stage, we actually are early stage. We don't get the luxury of saying to any teams that come to us that you're too early for us. We are usually the first investor in a lot of our founding teams. We are an investor in VC scale companies, but the reason that this topic is important to me, and I think important to Antler as well, is because our mandate really revolves around founders and what we look for in people first before products and businesses themselves. And I think the interesting part of this topic to me is where you can find like sort of the traits for a great founding team or a great individual as a founder in a lot of different places, and those places are not often tapped into, they're not highlighted, they're not brought into the spotlight in the investment world, especially further up the chain in VC. So I think Antler represents to me this really great opportunity for founders where we are really taking people at their, like, who are they as a person and do they have what it takes to build a VC scale company. I'm also really keen to dive into with the rest of the panelists today about broader entrepreneurship that's not necessarily VC scale as well, because I think that's quite important where we're talking about value creation beyond just the Canvas, the Culture Amps of the world, really awesome companies, but I'm really keen to like talk about how VCs, investors, and the wider startup ecosystem can help support value creation even at the smallest level. And I think if we have anything to lend there, that's where, from an investor perspective, I'm keen to unpack what that might be.
I love that, and that leads on perfectly to Michael, actually. So, Michael, would you like to introduce yourself?
Thank you very much. So Michael Macalino, I'm the Managing Director for APAC at SVG Ventures Thrive. SVG Ventures Thrive is a Silicon Valley-based VC firm and accelerator platform, and we focus purely on agri-food tech. And about 12 months ago, I started the role, and with the support of the Victorian government, we've actually expanded into the APAC region, where we're running some programs for growth stage agri-food tech companies, and also working with a number of agri-food tech businesses such as Dairy Australia, Agriculture Victoria, etc. So really trying to sort of grow the agri-food tech ecosystem in Australia, and then make some investments along the way. This particular topic is of huge interest and passion of mine. Although we are a venture capital firm, I'm a big advocate for small to medium business. And the reason for that is that I spent 13 years being an entrepreneur. I built 5 businesses over that time. The first business was actually just a car and boat detailing business. So I got sick and tired of university. I love cars, and started putting letterbox drops in all the rich suburbs, and then people with Ferraris and stuff started calling me, trying to get me to clean their car. That then ended up, basically, I grew that business over 4 years. Along the way, I actually invented a way of purifying water down to 0 parts per million, so you could clean a car and a boat with like 3 litres of water, no chemicals. Wow. Scaled that up to have a team of like 8 people, and then sold that a few years later. So I was like 24, sold that business, and then started a gym. Ended up working in property development, built a marina. I then started a couple of e-commerce businesses, a cloud consulting business, and then went full-blown startup mode as a CTO and co-founder for an accounting technology company back in like 2015 to 2017. So we raised money, grew that to like 50 people, and grew that to like Australia and US. So I've done the full entrepreneurship thing. I've got a very good perspective of the full gamut of, what it takes to grow an SME type business and also a venture business. And I've got some perspectives to share on both of those today.
Amazing. And we're going to hear lots more about Michael's story as we continue this conversation. Nerida, can you tell me about?
Nerida Kerr. I work for a small company called AgBiz Assist. We're a not-for-profit and a charity based in northeast Victoria. So we're very much at the grassroots. And I also represent another very small company called Startup Shakeup. So AgBiz Assist, we've been around for over 30 years working in rural and regional Australia. Primarily we grew out of rural financial counselling and small business financial counselling. So that's very much assisting people recover from financial hardship for whatever the reason, whether that's natural disaster, economic downturns, or personal things that have gone wrong. Our company has also we've been basically reliant on government funding for very many years, and we've determined that that's not a good space to be in. Whilst government funds are great. We've also done some entrepreneurship ourselves. Instead of helping other people, we're helping ourselves. So we've set up a social enterprise called Community Business Connect, and we have a telecommunications company. We do full managed IT, and we just taken on a $2 million grant to put connectivity into areas of the Upper Murray or Tauranga Shire alpine areas, and that's just been expanded out to Indigo Shire as well as part of the fire recovery, because what we found very quickly when we were assisting with the 2020 bushfires is people just didn't have communications, and that put lives and recovery at risk. Startup Shakeup has recently joined our group of companies, and it's a entrepreneur innovation and digital. They do digital literacy. So between Startup Shakeup and AgBiz Assist, we're very much at the grassroots, assisting people with education and support and helping them do with their business transition. So I'm very much at the bottom end of where the rest of the panellists are, but it's a very important space. And I believe that entrepreneurship will be absolutely critical for the future of regional Australia, particularly as we're dealing with climate change, and particularly for communities who need to be less reliant on local government and governments to determine their own future. There's a big movement in community entrepreneurship and social enterprise out there, so people can be self-reliant and basically model their own future. So this is a really great topic. Thank you.
Amazing. Great. Thank you. Now, just to also involve you all in the audience in today, I'd love to have a show of hands. So we talked a little bit now about the challenges of regional Australia, but I know that some of you probably aren't Australian and can't even fathom the fact that there are areas of our country not so far from Melbourne that actually don't have internet connections and are really classified as rural, but they're really within 2 or 3 hours of Melbourne, which is crazy. If you imagine your own countries, I'm sure that's not the case. So I'd just love a show of hands. Anybody here international? Yeah, great. So welcome to Australia and our really bad internet connection. And our weather. You might have noticed that yesterday we had 26 degrees and today it feels like 6. So welcome to Melbourne. It's beautiful. And so I'd also love to know what kind of industry sectors you're all in. So I know this, it is very much about an education sector. So anybody here in education or ed tech? Couple education, yes, not many. And they're all next door. Apparently they're all next door. Okay, all right, good no. Anybody here more globally in innovation? Love to know more what kind of innovation you're all in. So any show of hands around innovation? Ooh, very shy. Okay, great, amazing. I'm just going to reach out to someone, front row. You're going to get asked a question. What level of innovation are you in? What kind of innovation?
Health and wellbeing innovation.
Oh, amazing.
Supporting national ecosystem to do systems change and support innovators.
Amazing. So health and wellness innovation. Any other health and wellness people in the room? Because I'm a connector. So here we go. We've got connections here of 2 people in health and wellness on the second row. Who would have thought it? Oh.
Tough crowd.
Anybody else want to shout out what sector you're in? And I'm going to connect you with somebody else who's in your sector. Any brave souls? Yes. Sorry? Impact. Oh my gosh. Anybody else in impact in the room? Yes, a few of you all sitting together. There we go. You guys can all go and have coffee after this. Or maybe a glass of champagne. Okay, great. Well, welcome everyone. No matter where you're from, it's lovely to have you in the room today. So I'm going to start by heading back over to Michael. Your entrepreneurship journey is one that is probably really aspiring for all the young people and the people who have are already starting on that entrepreneurial journey, and how you made your business from car detailing into selling an international IT company. So yeah, I'd love to know a bit more about you. But first of all, you've been an entrepreneur for many years, and you have a really true grassroots approach to entrepreneurship. So what mistakes do you see and hear that founders are making in today's market, and why do you think it's relevant right now to this subject, those mistakes?
Yeah, so I might start with the mistakes part of it and not really frame it as so much mistakes, but what I'm seeing in the ecosystem in Australia and globally is this... Hello?
It's next door. Everything's happening next door.
They're all excited next door. So we hear a lot about entrepreneurship, a lot about startups, and I've mentored in basically every startup program there is in this country over the past 10 years. And what I find is this sort of monolithic approach to company building. Every company, it's like pitch deck, get in front of VCs, billion-dollar company, sell to someone or IPO. And that is one way of building a company and one way of creating value. And what I think is really important, particularly with the companies that we need now in this world to actually address real problems, is, from an ag tech agriculture perspective, there was one until about a week ago, real ag tech unicorns. There was one that was valued at about 1.5 billion, and it's now worth, at its latest valuation, 200 million. So building a unicorn is really hard. So I think it's really important when we're looking at grassroots entrepreneurship at accelerator programs, at incubators, at universities, research organisations, is letting entrepreneurs know that it's okay to aspire to build a $20 million business.
Absolutely.
So that's something which I think if we can change that narrative, what we then get back to is at the inception point of a business, what is the business model and what is the associated funding model and go-to-market model that is actually going to build a viable business that can serve customers and, particularly in this type of funding environment, be aspirational for profitability from the get-go. And the way that you look about your customers, your staffing, your product roadmap, everything, if you're trying to be $1 billion company or you're trying to be a $20 or $50 million business, those two pathways are fundamentally different.
Absolutely. And how do you see that changing? So is your thought that more companies should aim to bootstrap and go slower, or is it that you see that the perspective of VCs need to change? What's your...
Yes, I mean, I think the VC industry has picked up what works in Silicon Valley and tried to replicate that around the world, and that just simply does not work. So I think that what we've realised, and I've analysed a lot of different companies over the years, is that most companies need from 250,000 to 500,000 to get going. We can't avoid the fact that you need some type of seed capital to pay founders, to pay for hardware, and especially at the moment, we need to build companies in the real world, not just software companies. So we need to build companies in the real world that need real components, and they need real manufacturing and so forth. So as an investor, what I'm looking at is, okay, how do we give this company $500,000 and get them to a point where they are then cash flow positive, and then the next round of funding should really be like fuel on a fire to accelerate growth, or the company then goes and basically gets into cash flow positive. So the use of capital needs to start being aimed more at fueling real fundamental growth in a business, not growth for the sake of the VC marking up their book and getting the next fund. Please don't tell my CEO that I said that.
And the challenge with that conversation is that we hear over and over again that you have to prove traction before the VC will even look at you. And of course, you can't do that in a hardware business. You can't do that in a business that needs a big upfront investment to be able to make the product live. So there's obviously going to have to be a shift in thinking from an investment perspective, or investment money needs to come from different places. I'm really interested to hear what other people feel about that perspective, especially I'm looking at you, Akhil.
Yeah, I think just to touch on a few things Michael said, we actually look for the trait in founders that they understand their milestones and the pathway from our first check, which is realistically not going to get them extremely far, but it gets them to a point where they can raise another round. But understanding what the milestone they need to hit is really, really important. I think touching on the point that hardware businesses, people creating things in the real world, can't show traction is probably not what we see. Not in the sense of they need to build prototypes. That's where I think founders focus a lot on probably things that are a bit further up the chain. Whereas we're also looking at what can you prove to us about yourself that builds up a body of logic that suggests that you will get there in 6, 12 months, whatever it's going to be. And there's also a lot of things you can do actually prior to prototyping an MVP to actually demonstrate that, hey, we're still solving a real problem and we know exactly how to access our customers. I think the grassroots side of this is really where I see founders probably falling over the most, is not spending enough time deeply understanding their customers and getting inside those communities to actually do it. So that's the type of traction we look for as a really, really early stage investor. And I think if I'm being frank, investors further upstream have the luxury of being able to say, well, are you making money or are you not? We're really looking at the people side of it as a first port of call.
The proof of the problem, and talking to customers and understanding that problem face value at the grassroots is really what you're talking about.
Exactly. And founders can demonstrate that in a lot of ways. I think the best ways we've seen have you have little to no resources, you have a very short amount of time, and so it's like what type of creativity comes out from people to actually show that. I think that really can come from a lot of different types of people. We see, I think my favorite types of problems to see coming to our table is actually the ones that we've never heard anything about.
Yeah, that's really exciting. Margaret, I'm interested in your perspective, being from the university sector. Obviously, it's education first, and you gave me a really great example of of how that's framed in the university space. I'd love you to explain a little bit more about that later. But you obviously, as we think about education and we think about this subject of the grassroots approach to entrepreneurship, do you see an opportunity for universities to support entrepreneurial skills outside of the classroom? And how do you see that framing up? And how do you see innovation happening in the education space?
Thank you. It's a big question.
Sorry.
And yes, look, in entrepreneurship education, clearly that exists on a spectrum, just as entrepreneurship does, from how do we build the mindsets of founders coming in at undergrad level right through to what's happening in research and innovation in terms of commercialization and building those skills. And so that's happening next door. We'll park that. But the university really has a unique role to play, I feel, in grassroots entrepreneurship. Within the walls, it's on the education front. We have to think about, for example, as we're building incubator and accelerator programs, not just are we building them to pitch to VC. We at Activator, we're looking at building impact founders and impact ventures. They're not all VC scalable. But when we run those programs, they can equally be exclusionary, because we forget sometimes that if they're co-curricular and we're working with disadvantaged students who have to go to jobs, or students who are first in family to university, and all of their effort go, particularly our international students, into trying to get a career, get a job, that we have to think about those things. We have to meet those students and those people where they're at. And then there's the role the university plays outside the walls of the institution. And that's really fascinating, and has brought Activator actually into contact with Nerida and with Danny down there from Launch Vic in regional and rural entrepreneurship, where we have access to partnerships and funding that grassroots providers do not. Government funds, revenues coming in from large corporates who are trying to work in community and themselves have social procurement and or impact objectives, and we can work with them. But I think sometimes we believe that as a university we have a natural social license to operate in these communities and at grassroots level. And I think our learning in terms of working with a large corporate down in Southwest Victoria, doing community empowerment in the context of wind farms, working with Indigenous businesses, helping them think about global growth. We don't actually have the social license to operate that we think we have as universities. And we need to change how we frame our role outside the walls of the university. How do we really deliver impact? And that is about thinking about how do we co-create value, but also how do we share that value? So how do we bring in those revenues into the university and then work with AgBiz Assist, work with Meredith Sharing Shed, who are down there on the ground, delivering programs, meeting those people where they're at. You know, we can go to a school and say, let's do a fantastic design thinking workshop for you students. They're down there building literally community gardens so that they can teach the students about alternative ways to innovate water, ways to think about soil, ways to grow things. They have a tiny tech hub. They're coming in and people are 3D printing signs for their local store. That's grassroots. Right? And there's a big gap between where we are as a large institution and where that needs to be.
Absolutely.
But we do have a role in working with those communities and sharing the resources and giving access to the resources we have. And I think perhaps the other thing I would say is that as a university, we're very focused on knowledge. right?
Yes.
And we had this. And we do have a saying that, you know, study makes a scholar, and we need scholars. And universities are amazing places of scholarship and knowledge creation. I believe that entrepreneurship is about access to opportunity. And everybody's right to find and pursue opportunities and create their own future. That requires action.
Yeah.
And that requires that universities also take up the role as places that not just create knowledge, but really create opportunity. And suddenly you start to think differently about how universities operate.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
I'll just stop there.
That's a great example. And I think there's a real power in really taking people where they're at, which is what you've mentioned before, and giving them a really deep knowledge learning experience for a short period of time that gets them to the next level. And then we let them go and build their thing, and then give them another short, sharp influx of knowledge. Nuda, I'm interested to know what your experience has been in that space and how you see that working.
I suppose I'm very much in tune with everyone else here, but at that grassroots level, it's, you know, we've seen some wonderful successes out in rural and regional Australia, but we've also seen some spectacular failures, and often that's because they're under capitalised, and there's just not the support out there for people to succeed and, you know, find like-minded people and groups that can support them through the journey, because entrepreneurship is a real journey. And I suppose some of the things that we've learnt, whether it's in a startup or, you know, doing something really brilliant, value-adding to another business, is that you really have to understand your market, really have to understand your product, have to understand the finances of it. And you need to make sure that there's a long-term return. Protect your IP. So many people have, and it's really hard to protect IP today. So many people have brilliant ideas, and next thing you see, someone else has grabbed it and taken it. And we see that in regional Australia quite a lot. Or we can't get support for it, and then it's taken overseas. But it's really important that people do get advice from professionals and organisations like Startup Shake-Up and our organisation, and it's all about information, education, and entrepreneurship. You know, and being with like-minded people. And there's really very few services available in regional Australia, and sometimes when they are funded, they are funded on the same basis as what an urban organisation would be and their expectation. And it's just not practical, and it just doesn't work. It's about a long-term investment in building that whole rural ecosystem. And one of our mainstay sayings is, you know, we've pinched it from Jeff Bezos, is it really takes 10 years to be an overnight success.
Yeah.
And I think that's sort of the pressure that people think that, you know, they've got to be, you know, fully fledged, profitable businesses in 12 months. And the reality is that just doesn't happen.
I think 10 years, but also many mistakes and many pivots and many changes to that product. It's not always the first thing you come up with that's the $1 million idea or multi-million-dollar idea. So I think that's a really important point for us.
And it's also really important that you find a friend to fail with. Because if you go out into your market with your product too much, and unless you've, you know, tested it within a friendly environment, it's often in regional Australia, it's really hard to get a second chance. Because, you know, particularly if you're putting a product into a farming or a primary production area, farmers in Australia are some of the best risk managers in the world. We have the toughest farming conditions. We have the least amount of support. And unless they can see the benefit, unless they can see some productivity and some financial gains, you're really pushing uphill to get someone to take it up. So,
so I'm just interested what everybody else thinks about that, like how hard it is to start a business in rural Australia. You've got some experience, Michael, I think, in more rural ag tech spaces. How difficult are you seeing it?
I think COVID was an amazing thing for entrepreneurship in regional Australia. What happened during COVID is you had a lot of people from the cities go into regional areas and basically start to connect and start to, interact with the local community. So you had a whole range of new skill sets.
Yeah.
And what we've actually started seeing is ag tech companies launch in regional Australia. And if you have a look at the likes of Swarm Farm Robotics is in Emerald, like 5 hours from Brisbane or something crazy like that. There are, regional hubs that are now able to support these ag tech companies. So I think that it has been historically very difficult, connectivity, internet connectivity, access to capital, but I think COVID has changed that, and I think there's some opportunities there.
Right.
I recently did a sort of tour through regional Queensland and met with farmers and entrepreneurs during that thing, and I was out at Longreach, and there was a guy who, Longreach for the international people is basically look at Queensland, look at the middle of Queensland, and that's Longreach. It's basically about 10 hours just driving land. There's not much out there, but what I met was a few entrepreneurs that had taken technology and seen that there was an unmet need for creating mesh networks to enable connectivity on farm. These people had, more work than they knew what to do with. They had a thriving multi-million-dollar business that was only a couple of years old. They weren't trying to build a unicorn. They weren't trying to take over the world. But what that was doing is I had a chat to some people that had interacted with that company, and that had enabled their business to actually be viable, because all of a sudden their IoT sensor that previously had no way of connecting actually had connectivity in the region. So if we can create viable businesses that are sort of like, beacons of, internet connectivity, we joke about it, but it's actually this sort of, and I know in places like Africa, as soon as you get Starlink into these places, and I know even locally, we've got some farmers that we speak to who could never be on a Zoom call. And then all of a sudden Starlink, I mentioned Starlink to this farmer, and he goes, "You've changed my life." Like all of a sudden, like we've got internet banking is easier, like all of this stuff. So, entrepreneurship has to be activated and enabled by a whole range of different things. It's capital, it's connectivity, it's technical talent in those areas. The Swarm Farm Robotics, they have their entire manufacturing in Emerald. So they've brought software developers and robotics engineers from the cities to Emerald, and now there's a whole bunch of other businesses that are sort of around that.
That's amazing.
Yeah, it's incredible.
We talk a lot about that co-founder relationship and the importance of having the expert on the ground and the technical expert in the team, so that that's going to be a strength and product. And we think about that in regards to networks. When we think about the startup network, we want to be able to connect people from different states that have different skills, from people all over Australia, to ensure that the better innovation can be created and stronger products can be created. Akhil, I'm sure that you've got lots of experience of building those amazing co-founder relationships from working with Antler, because I know you build those advisors and those teams around the individual with that expertise. But I guess what I really would like to know from you is, of those products that didn't hit the cutting room floor, the ones that really are surviving and thriving, what grassroots approaches did they take to make sure their business was going to be successful? And was there any advice that you would give around how we could use the grassroots approach to creating product?
So I probably want to touch first a little bit on what Michael mentioned around the resources it takes to actually get there. And I think Antler, from us as an investor perspective, it's hard for us to actually get into those communities. There's no delusions about that from our side. But one thing, we do also see value in entrepreneurs working together, or people with entrepreneurial spirit working together in person. So we actually provide a stipend for people to come relocate to either Melbourne or Sydney when they want to build with us. So we've seen a lot of really amazing startups come out of that. We had a couple of guys come over from Perth. They lived one lived 2 hours down south of Perth and another an hour north of Perth. And they flew over to Sydney for our program and realized they were a complementary fit for a generative AI-enabled edtech startup. So one cool thing is that they can actually run what's hopefully going to be a really huge edtech startup regionally, virtually, and from the other side of the country to the investor that they worked with for a little bit to get that first check. So I think that digitization of that COVID really accelerated has been, in some ways really positive for the entrepreneurship community. We still like to get them all into one place, get some ideas flowing in person and people just jotting stuff on a whiteboard. And then, sorry, what was the...
I guess I was asking more around how have you seen the grassroots approaches working for the entrepreneurs and the people that you work with on that?
So I think there's two ways that I see it play out generally. The first is really around what I mentioned before, is that entrepreneurs who get in front of their customers and understand them deeply, there is a strong correlation between that and their success in at least our investment process. So some of the best examples that I've seen is, people who in a span of 3-4 weeks, which is at least our investment process is not, it's not a really long one, they've managed to get in front of 150 different manufacturing partners and really just understand, like, how do you think about this problem? And so that's no small feat in and of itself. It's a double-edged sword what they're proving there. They're proving, they're starting to get some early indications of whether or not their solution's actually going to work, but they're also showing that they have the tenacity to actually get in front of their customers, and they're telling us something about themselves in that approach as well. The second way that I've seen a lot of success from a grassroots perspective is actually in the co-founder matching piece. So, Antler, one of our core capability is co-founder matching, and we bring cohorts together to help founders meet their ideal co-founder, but it doesn't always work out in our program. It takes a lot of serendipity, it takes a lot of luck to actually land on the right fit, and it's not always going to work out straight away. It could take months, it could take even years, and we've actually seen that play out over time where we've, at least Antler has now been building this really global network where people are actually matching well after the fact of coming into the Antler world for the first time. But the other way that it happens is that they actually just get out in front of other people and say, hey, I really want to build a really big thing. I know I've got what it takes. I know I've got the ambition to do it. And they just go and cold call other people, whether it's in their network or, or an actual cold call, and they're talking to complete strangers, and they say, I think you might be a right fit. And they're starting these micro communities of founders, or at least people with that entrepreneurial spirit, to fail together, as Nerida mentioned as well. So I think the co-founder matching piece, whether it's done sort of inside the Antler world or outside of it, is probably where we see founder-led or entrepreneur-led initiatives coming up a lot. And obviously Antler, our initiative is Antler-led, but that's where it all kicks off. And I think people get a lot of drive from that as well. The idea of, potentially having capital a few weeks down the line is a massive game changer.
Yeah, absolutely. And I like that even from an education perspective, from a university's perspective, this bringing together of thought leaders or bringing together of advisors with a scientist or a mathematician with an MBA student. Is that something that you see playing out at universities, or is that something you've ever heard?
I'll be really honest. I think that that universities, there are pockets of excellence, but we have a long way to go. We work in quite a siloed way. We're not particularly action-oriented. Entrepreneurship in many universities is either window dressing or a sideline activity, and really needs to be seen to be embedded as just a core skill, as just a way of being in the 21st century. We are not in a world anymore where careers last a lifetime. They don't even last 5 years. And again, it's going back to how are we teaching people to create and pursue opportunity? Knowledge is a commodity nowadays, right? And we are in danger as universities of becoming obsolete. Right?
No,
We're being hounded by EdTech with good reason. And that's a shame, because if we get it right, and when it's done well, it is transformative and it is life-changing for people and for communities. One of the really interesting examples I've seen, we spoke about earlier, is the London Interdisciplinary School. It's a new university in London. It's one of the first new universities in the UK. Their students don't have to pass an exam to get in. They're assessed on how far they've come in life, what they've overcome, what they've achieved, often from quite disadvantaged backgrounds.
Yeah.
They come in and then they work on challenges posed by critical stakeholders in their community, from the police to large corporates to charities. And that's how they learn.
And that speaks so much to a much broader subset of the population beyond the scholar, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I believe every entrepreneur will learn whatever he or she or they need to learn to move forward in their journey, right? So we're starting and we have a constant narrative about you must have these tech skills and you must have this disciplinary knowledge. Yeah. If you create innovators and entrepreneurs, if you light that ambition in them and that aspiration, they will learn AI. They will learn 3D printing. They will learn cyber, because that's going to be what gets them moving forward. We can spend all of our time building fantastic cybersecurity experts if they don't have the ambition to then go out, find opportunities and pursue them and be entrepreneurial in how they apply that knowledge. We're still going to be sitting here 10 years from now.
And that's really interesting, actually, because we've just launched a course at the Startup Network all about finding your value. And we believe really wholeheartedly that once you find the true value and your purpose and the thing that you live by every day, and then you find the problem associated with that, you're much more likely to spend the rest of your life and your career, at least, working on solving that problem. And that creates really exciting innovation. That creates really exciting innovators, because they are so passionate and care so deeply about the problem they're trying to solve. Do you see that that's a future for education?
I see that's a future for education, but I think it means that we're going to blow up our education system. I think that's all good.
I'm all for that.
Hooray! We're all for that. Right, well, we are already at, 2:15, and we only have 5 minutes, I think, left to go, yes. Is there any questions around, around value-led education, grassroots education, anything that you're all really curious to hear about from our panel of experts? Yes.
My name is Robert Blackledge. I run a business incubator in Florida. So my question is, how do you express to the universities and the other colleges to start those entrepreneur programs and open them up to the community? Because a lot of times they're only available to the students.
Great question. So this is a question around all of the education opportunities we have for entrepreneurship within universities, and how do we open that up to a broader community rather than those people that either have been at that university or are currently at that university, correct? Any thoughts on that? Because that's something I'm also really passionate about.
I guess I'll just speak. It's hard. So a lot of our programs, we have two, our entrepreneurial programs are for students, staff and alumni. And we try to ensure that at least one of our founders is from the university. But we do have the opportunity for founding teams to come in. So that's one way. The university will obviously want to know why we're investing university resources in people who are not alumni or active students. But that's why this third arm, and looking outside the walls of the university, looking into and building that argument in the university about we have an obligation, a moral obligation to serve the communities in which we are situated, and that goes outside the walls of the university. And that's where working with stakeholders and leveraging the relationship and the power we have as institutions to go to government and go to corporates, bring in that fund through partnership, and then go into community and use that to then co-design and co-deliver incubators with people who are doing it in the community, with the startup shake-ups, with runway Geelongs, et cetera, et cetera. That's how we do it.
And I think it's a really interesting challenge, right? Australia is a country of immigrants, and a lot of people arrive in this country with a university degree already. And just because they've got the university degree already doesn't mean that they're no longer entrepreneurs or that they've no longer got an opportunity to build a startup. And so that's where I see a big gap in the universities, is that acceptance of people from overseas into these accelerator programs, into these incubators, to enable that to happen across communities.
They're not already, our international student body, when you talk about entrepreneurial ambition, it's incredible. Probably goes beyond what we see from some of our own students. But outside that, again, that's inside the walls and outside the walls.
Yeah, amazing.
I'll let somebody else answer.
I'd just like to comment on that. We're looking at this exact problem ourselves because we really want to get entrepreneurship and a whole lot of supports and infrastructure and incubators out in regional Victoria to start with. We're actually we're currently going to the corporate sector and to say, invest in us, and that we think the payback will be really high in the long term. So we're actually, hoping that the corporate sector will then invest in the regional communities and invest in entrepreneurs, and then we can bring the RMITs and the other educators out. Because of the particular funding systems in Australia, it makes it very hard. Everything's so siloed. So we're really looking outside the square and saying, well, how can we do this? And where is the benefit to the community and where is the long-term benefit? And we see that as partnering with corporates.
Yeah, great example. Anybody else got anything they want to add to that? More questions? Yes. Front row. Yep. Health and well-being, Guy.
Yeah, health and well-being. Looking at some complex, wicked problems such as how we address well-being in the community, do you have any sort of thoughts on how to incentivise funding to grassroots initiatives, and particularly in the sort of preventative space where it's like the link to the problems a little bit more diffuse?
Yeah. So just to repeat the question, do we see any opportunities for investment in the rural communities or for well-being?
Grassroots approaches to address.
Yeah, okay, so more investment in those grassroots approaches rather than thinking about the VC funding.
We're very much in that mental health space because financial distress and mental health go together, and poverty and everything else that we end up dealing with. Once again, it's that funding model, and we've been trying to get farmer wellbeing programs within our organisations for 20 years that I know of. We've finally cracked it through the philanthropic sector, and we were able to demonstrate through that philanthropic funding the absolute benefit of having that wellbeing and not acute mental health, and investing in people before they get sick, really sick. And government has actually taken it up. So we've got to break down the funding models within the health sector, because we've been knocking on their doors for 20 years, and because we're not a recognised health agency, we can't even get a look in. So we've gone around them, and we're demonstrating. So I think that's another institution to knock down.
Just I'd like to say, I think this is a really important question and issue here. It's about measurement and metrics, and how do we hold different types of entrepreneurship to account in terms of outcomes and impact. But we really lack, as an impact community, and I know we have people in impact here, we really lack good approaches to tracking and monitoring impact from some of these initiatives, in order to be able to go back to funders and say, here is the impact, here's what you've saved. And it's not all about revenue, obviously, and it's not all quantitative. And we live in a world where a lot of these decisions are made on quantitative data. But I think as an impact community, that's one thing we could start to think about together and innovate around, is how do we look at impact-led entrepreneurship, okay, and regenerative entrepreneurship. These are new terms even. We don't even have models of practice for them. But, we always know, and it's another old saying, but what gets measured gets done. And if we're not measuring impact, it won't get done. So, sorry.
I was just going to say, like, even at the VC scale, impact is seeing like demonstrable, tangible investment and value creation. Like, there's strong suggestions that it will reach about, we're talking $1 trillion in value in the impact world. And so VCs understand this. Fund through rates are actually increasing, and they're very, very comparable to non-impact organizations at the moment, which is, I think, really exciting. It means that you don't have to. I think there's been probably a misconception today where founders think that I'm building an impact or social venture and I can't get VC funding. That's not really that true, at least from an Antler perspective. I've also observed that in the venture world, and if Michael can speak to this more as well, but VC firms are also sort of banding together at the moment to actually embed ESG and impact tracking right at the start of an entrepreneurial journey, because we're getting, we get pressure from both society, LPs, governments, founders themselves to actually do that. So we're seeing more of that tracking actually taking place as well. And I think that's the ammunition that's going to actually accelerate that fund through rate even further in the future.
Amazing. Okay, one more question.
We talked quite a lot about ways to support entrepreneurs, but can we just peel it back a bit to what is it that actually makes an entrepreneur? And can it, we've heard from Margaret about making entrepreneurs in university. Michael dropped out of university to become an entrepreneur, and Akil effectively looks at people later on in their careers, probably not straight out of university, finds and drills into those specific traits as to what is that potential. And so I feel like if we can peel back to that, we can then figure out the best way to really direct our resources in the best way. And I'd love to hear.
Great question. The question was, how do we identify what makes a great entrepreneur? And is there something that we need to look into rather than thinking about the university track or the VC track, or just actually identifying the people that make the best kind of entrepreneurs and how they're going to be successful? Correct? Yeah.
I think what we should all be looking at is actually Gen Z creators, the creator economy. I have been blown away by the level of entrepreneurship that it has been growing over the past few years. And I think that, if we look at universities were developed around the industrial age and to produce labour and workers. And what we will need in the future is that our jobs, our careers will evolve. I've done so many different things, and I've used YouTube, I've used mentors, I've used a whole range of sources to learn those skills. And ultimately, what entrepreneurship is identifying a problem, identifying an audience, and basically creating something of value to be able to basically give to that audience. And I think it's no more evident than, I don't use TikTok, but Instagram and everything that you see, these people that basically create a brand, it's their personal brand, then they create products. And, if you look at the theory, 1,000 true fans, I think that for me is something I think is an incredible framework for entrepreneurship. You don't have to sell to the world. If you can create and find 1,000 people who will pay you to deliver something, most people around the world can create a viable business that supports themselves and their family. And I think the other flip side of that is also looking at the cost of starting a business, looking at the cost of entrepreneurship is coming down every single year. So we don't need as much funding. We can do more with less. Yeah, we have no-code products now. We have the ability to build a product basically from scratch, but with, like you said, just education from a book or a YouTube channel. And I have a controversial opinion that in the future, not too far in the future, the smartest kids are going to leave school at 18 and start their own businesses and become entrepreneurs, and the not-so-smart kids are going to go to university. Sorry, everybody here in the university. Already happening. Thank you, young kids in the audience. So, Akhil, do you have any?
I was just going to add, you can probably also flip the script on, let's say as an investor, we might see a founder come to us, or with an idea come to us, let's say, and then we say, does the founder have the traits to build the business around the idea they're talking about? But I do think that the question that you're asking around what are the fundamental traits in a person, you can identify those well before that fact and reverse engineer and push people towards the entrepreneurial track and show them that it's a real track to take. So I generally believe that it starts at an education. On the education side, I really love the work that RMIT, Margaret's doing there with the students that come through, but also other organisations. Wade runs Wade Institute here in Melbourne runs a program to help teachers show how to teach students about entrepreneurship, for example. And so it's like the traits that you can almost reverse engineer that we look for as an investor as well are, an ability to see further than most people around them, unkillability, that even if Antler, the startup ecosystem, everything didn't exist around them, they wouldn't be able to not solve that problem anyway. A resilience and tenacity and sort of the grit it takes to actually do that. So these are more fundamental people traits that you can actually push towards the entrepreneurial track on the education side, I believe, as well.
But I also still believe that maybe we're waiting a little bit too long to capture those people, right? We're saying, oh, go to university, get your degree, come out at 22 and start it, and potentially then go on to do an entrepreneurial additional education or go to Antler or whatever. What about if we went into schools and at 16 we said to the kids, at 12 we said to the kids, don't worry about ATAR. ATAR is an Australian thing, basically your A-level results or equivalents. Off you go and figure out what's your value, what's the thing you really give a shit about. Let's help you build a career from a very young age around what you really care about. I see it myself in my 16-year-old son who really cares about soccer. He doesn't give a shit about anything else, but he wants to go and be a coach now. He knows. I told him from the age of 12, you love strategy, you love soccer, figure out a career. And that's the kind of things we need to be encouraging our children to do. Margaret, what were you?
No, I wanted to give one voice.
Okay, sorry. Danielle has got your hand in the air. Sorry. Go ahead.
I just wanted to chime in. Hi, everyone. Danny from Launchpad. I coordinate regional Victoria with the team. Just to Hugo's question, I think that grassroots stuff is actually giving any everyday person the opportunity to believe that they can create something.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that's the grassroots work that I do in regional Victoria, and just talking about entrepreneurship and the work that Launchpad does in creating an ecosystem where what we heard from Mick Fanning is that belief that they can try. Is so important. And I'm connected with each of these people on stage, and that builds out that network so that I can meet those people and then refer them on to that further belief and support.
Amazing. We are all out of time. I'm so sorry, everybody. Thank you so much for coming this morning. And great job. Big round of applause, please, to our fabulous panelists. They were awesome.